Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest's mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome back to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am here today with Jim Marshall. And Jim is a polymathic intellectual who has devoted over 50,000 hours to the study and practice of multiple dimensions of human potential and development. And we are going to delve down something that Jim developed that I had never even heard of, called Septemics. And I am really excited to delve down all of that. Thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
So, who would you say Jim is at the core?
At the core, I would say I'm somebody who is gradually morphing into an angel.
Morphing into an angel. So, you haven't always been an angel?
Well, James Madison famously said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary, but men are not angels. So, this has been a lifelong thing for me, and I'm looking forward to becoming a professional angel in the afterlife. So that's sort of, I meditate every day, and every day I get a little bit closer.
I love that. Now, can you take us down memory lane? Tell us about your upbringing, childhood, family dynamic, however deep you want to go.
Well, the first thing I should say, just to give some context to everything else I'm going to say, is that I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published in the book, Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Now, that's like a framework for what I'm going to say now. So I have no memory whatsoever of a time in my life when I was not intensely interested in learning everything taught in every university. Now, of course, that's impossible, but the drive is there. That's who I am as a person. So I was a very diligent student. I started school at 3, and I've been engaged in education my entire life to this very day. I can still remember the first moment when I discovered that some children didn't like school. It was a great shock to me. I was at the blackboard learning division, arithmetic division with another boy, and he said something that puzzled me. I said, wait a minute, you mean you don't like school? He said, no, I hate school. I was shocked. What a concept. You mean some children don't like school? That was like a whole new idea to me. And that really helped me understand the other kids better. Because, I went to school for 28 years and I would have gone longer, but, after a while, life catches up with you and you have other things to do. So that's, I was sort of a natural polymath. I wanted to learn everything. And so I was a very diligent student and won scholarships, was an honor student, et cetera, et cetera. So really the path to Septemics began when I was 16, when I was accepted into engineering school. And of course, at the time, I thought I was going to be engineering physical things, as did all the other students, like airfoils or motors or electrons. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me I wanted to engineer the human psyche because it is the area of greatest mystery. And more importantly, it is the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. Most of the problems in industrialized society are because people don't understand the wife, don't understand the husband, don't understand the daughter, don't understand the son, et cetera, et cetera. This is a big thing. Everybody has this problem, and I have solved it with Septemics because it gives you a way to understand people using natural phenomena. So I had a long career as a human development engineer, working one-on-one with hundreds of clients of every description. All of them improved as a result of our work. But I started to notice incidentally that I could predict the outcome of this. I didn't tell that to anyone, but I made notes. And as the decades rolled by, I came to be aware that the client would be at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed and written down. And that as a result of our interaction, he would go up to the next level on that scale. Now, that happened thousands and thousands of times. Sometimes it would happen 6 or 8 or 10 times in the same session. Every time it happened, it verified my hypothesis because the clients knew nothing whatsoever about Septemics or what I was doing, how I was doing it, what I was recording or anything. All they knew is they came to me for help and they got it. So by 1995, I had just observed these phenomena and written them down, and I realized there were these scales. And by then, I had 32 scales of varying lengths between 3 and 7. Now, I also, in that same period, was pondering a difficult client, and I realized that client was at a level on a scale that I had not previously observed. And as soon as I saw it, I knew where to insert it in the 6-level scale that I had. In other words, I had the 6-level scale that I knew was correct. And then I realized, there's a 7th level. And when I inserted it, it manifested mathematically. All these data jumped out at me without my looking for them. And it went from being a line, which is what a scale is, to a plane, meaning a whole body of data. So I suddenly had all this data corresponding to this particular scale that interlocked mathematically like a Chinese puzzle. Now, having taken 26 semesters of math and having loved every minute of it, math is a very real thing to me. So when I see it, I recognize it. And I said, whoa, whatever the hell this is, it has to be natural law because it has mathematics embedded in it. Like, for example, the Fibonacci sequence. So then I thought, I wonder how many of these other scales that I have are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way because I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So, knowing what I was looking for, I looked at all these other scales, and in a short period of time, each of them developed into a 7-level scale. And when it did, it manifested mathematically. So now I had 32 7-level scales, all of which had mathematics embedded in them. And I said, this looks like a new subject to me. I never saw anything like this before. So my next thought was, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as human development engineer, to helping them by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out so people can have it. So I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft was completed on December of 95, and I sent it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all responded very positively. They had different responses, but distinctly positive responses. And that told me this is exactly what I think it is, which is a new subject that could really help people. And I then spent the next 25 years of my life working on the book. Because first I had to discover the phenomena itself. I would see these things and I would write them down. Then I would see it again, see? And I would see this client would go from this level to this level, and another client would go through the same process. And this kept verifying it. So after I had the data, then I had to take that data and use it to craft a philosophical system. So I was going from science, which is discovering new phenomena, new natural phenomena, to engineering, which is creating something that works. That took 20 years. But the most time-consuming part of it was expressing this in a way that would make sense to the average reader of English. And I know I succeeded at that because some version of this book has existed now for 29 years. People get it. I was able to express this in a way that the average reader can look at it right away and say, oh, yeah, get it. This makes sense. Now, let me give you some context here. Can you remember the first time you saw the periodic table of elements?
Not specifically when it was.
It doesn't have to be. I'm just saying the experience you had when you first looked at it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like, I can remember the first time I saw it, I don't know, 12 or 13. I said, oh, yeah, see this? This is cool. At first blush, yeah, hydrogen is here, helium 2, lithium is 3, and it goes, everything is horizontal and vertical. See, the model works. So, several people have said to me, what book is your book like? And I have to say, in all candor, I don't think there's ever been a book like this before, at least on Earth. But each one of these scales that I mentioned is expressed in what you could call a table or a spreadsheet. And each of those tables is similar to the periodic table of elements. So there are 35 different scales, and each of them has 7 levels. And when you look at the table, it's like looking at the periodic table for the corresponding subject matter. And this is all about human phenomena. So if I may, I'd like to tell you the names of the scales, and then you'll know exactly what matter is in the book. May I do that?
Yeah.
So there are 35 scales. 24 of them are individual scales, meaning they apply primarily to an individual, and 11 of them are group scales, meaning they apply primarily to a group. So these are the individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, and the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales by itself could dramatically improve the life of the reader. And let me give you an example of how that would work. I mentioned the scale of motivation. One of the most important things to know about someone is their motivation, right? Why is this person doing this? So you could take this scale, there's 7 motivations, and you could go through everyone in your life and find their motivation. You know, like, oh, what is my mother's motivation toward me? Oh, yeah, I see. What is my father's motivation toward me? What is my pastor's motivation toward me? What is my brother's motivation toward me? Now, you could use this for everybody you know or have ever known. So you could wind up using this in this specific way 200, 300, 400 times. Then you could reverse the vector and say, what is my motivation toward my boyfriend? What is my motivation toward my boss? What is my motivation toward my Uncle Joe? You see, it's the opposite flow, and you could again use it 2 or 3 or 400 times. So by the time Tommy would have finished this exercise, you would know your motivation toward everybody in your life and the motivation of everyone in your life toward you. So this would be a major change in your consciousness. In other words, your mind would be greatly clarified. You wouldn't be going around saying, why does he do this? It would resolve all of that, see? So your mind would be greatly clarified. And your relationship with all those people would be better because you understand them better. Well, let's say you have a mother-in-law, right? And she does things that irritate you. And so you assess her on the scale. Where is she on the scale of motivation toward me? You know, oh, I see. She's a level 5. That explains why she does X, Y, and Z. So you're having an insight. Now you understand her better. so you can deal with her more successfully. So that's true for all 35 skills. So that's sort of how this works and what this is about.
Okay. Now, so what made you decide to develop this? You were noticing what you were noticing in your sessions. So what made you take the step to fully develop it?
Well, as I said, I had this 6 level scale that by then I absolutely knew was correct because I had been using it on a daily basis for decades and it was always right. But then I discovered it had another level, see? And when I inserted that 7th level, then it manifested mathematically. I said, whoa, this has got math in it. And coming from a hard science background, I thought, this is natural law. In a sense, each of these scales is like Newton's 3 laws of motion, or the Pythagorean theorem, or the laws of thermodynamics. It is part of nature. See, I just found it in the same way that Fibonacci found the Fibonacci sequence. He was a smart mathematician, and he noticed that there were certain numbers that kept appearing, and he couldn't figure out how these numbers fit together. But it's clear in nature you can find, like, for example, sunflower. If you count the seeds one way, it has one Fibonacci number. And if you count them the other way, it has a different Fibonacci numbers. And he knows that these creatures, there are many of them like that, don't know. So it's obviously something embedded. And he was able to look at these numbers and reverse engineer the formula out of it and give it to us. So that's what we call the Fibonacci sequence. So that's basically the same thing that happened with me. I looked at this data, said, there's something here. And because of my engineering approach, and because I was doing human development engineering on people, in other words, it was not counseling, it was precise engineering application of known data. And I got these data, these phenomena appearing. So when I saw that first scale manifest mathematically, that's when the light bulb went on over my head in 1995. This is big. Because I had been collecting these scales, but I did not know that there was a subject here, that they were all 7 level scales, that they were inherently mathematic. I was just writing down what I saw. And it helped me with my clients because a guy would come into me and I'd say, he's at this level. I wouldn't say it. He's at this level. And that means as he improves, he's going to go up to the next level. And I knew what that level was. And that's what would happen in the session. So needless to say, it only made me better at what I did. And so furthermore, after I saw this data in the sessions, I would go out into the real world and I would see it right in front of my face. I would see the exact same phenomena in people. So I knew this was real. When I saw how big this was and that people would really get this is not obscure. People get this and would really help people. I said, I'm going to put this in a book and get it out, and this will help the people of Earth. And that's what's been going on now for 29 years. People look at this and say, yeah, I get it. About 23 years ago, I'm talking to a buddy of mine about politics and government. And I was writing the book, and I had already developed the scale of government. So I said, wait a minute, let me show you something. He didn't even know I was writing a book. He didn't know anything about this at all. So I just opened this transcript to the scale of government. I handed it to him. I did not say a word. I did not even say, look at this. I just handed it to him. So he took it. And in about 1 second, he pointed just like that. He said, there, I'm right there. He found his level on that scale without me even suggesting that's what it was for. That's how easy this is to use. And I'll give you another example. A guy is reading one of these scales, right? And he gets down to, let's say, level 4. And I'll say, wait a minute. This is my mother-in-law. This is exactly how she is. See, it's so precise that it, without my ever meeting the mother-in-law, it describes her behavior with precision. He says, yeah, that explains why she does. So I don't know the mother-in-law. I probably don't even know the reader. There's people all over the world reading this book. I'm never going to meet them. But they say, oh, that explains why I did this to her, because I was at this level. So what happens is every time you find either yourself or another person on any level, you have an insight, or you might call it a realization, right? So you say, let me see. My mother's like a control freak. Let me see where she is on the scale of control, right? So you look at the scale. Ah, she's level 5. That explains it. That's exactly what she does. It's just described right here in the book. So when that happens, the relationship with her gets better and you're a little bit smarter. So this is what you might call a fruitful source of insight, because every person is at some level on every scale. So you, Amanda, are at some level on all 35 scales. And that data is just sitting there waiting for you to get. So you get the book, you study, and say, oh, yeah, I'm at level 3. That explains a lot. That explains why you do this and don't do that and that. So you see you're having a realization about yourself. And then you go to the next one. Oh, yeah, that's level 2. That's to the top of the scale. No wonder I'm good at that. You see? So what happens is, as you use this material, you're continually having insights. And with an insight is another way of saying you're getting a little smarter on things that are relevant to you. Let's say you have a guy, he doesn't understand his wife, right? So he starts to analyze her on this. Oh, she's at this level on the scale of sexuality. That explains a lot. See? He didn't know that when he walked in the room. Now he does. So he's a little smarter. Now, when he goes to analyze her on another scale, he takes that smartness with him to the next scale. So the next scale he uses is easier to use. And then he has 2 insights, and he takes both of them to the 3rd scale. So what happens here is, as you use this, you have insights, you're getting smarter. The smarter you get, the easier it is to use. The easier it is to use, the more you use it, and the more you use it, the smarter you get. So this will have the result of just lifting you up in your life to where you understand all the people around you much better, including yourself.
Can we backtrack a tad? You mentioned briefly about how you didn't understand how other kids didn't like school. Now, I'm just curious in terms of like your upbringing. Did your parents do a lot of schoolwork with you prior to going to school?
My parents ignored me completely. I was the type of kid, like, I'm sure they told me when I was 3 years old, before you come to the table, wash your hands. And that was it. They never had to tell me again. Every time before I went to the table, I washed my hands, and I'm still doing it now. So I was like what you might call a low maintenance kid, because I did whatever I was told. My father said, go do that. I did it. And that actually helped me in my studies, having won scholarships and being an honor student and all that. People say, well, you must be very smart. I say, no, it's just because I'm very conscientious. I did every homework assignment. I was that irritating kid who not only did all the homework assignments, I would do the extra credit projects. So sometimes my grade would be over 100. My grade in physics one semester was 104 because he would give a quiz every week and I got every answer perfect on every quiz. And then he would give bonus questions and I would get those right too. So I figured, well, he'll probably just give me 100. I don't think he's going to give me 104. So the card comes out and he gives me a 99. So I asked him, my average was 104. Why did you give me a 99? He said, because nobody gets 100 in my class. Dopey answer, authoritarian answer. But I don't even know if their system was set up to accept a 3-digit number, because it was computerized. Maybe it only took 2-digit numbers because that's normally what you had. So anyway, so that's just who I was as a person, you know. And not only would I study what I was supposed to study in school, but then I would study on the outside. Like I started reading books seriously when I was 10 years old. And the reason 10, because the local public library, you could not get a card until you were 10. So on my 10th birthday, my sister, who was older than I, took me to the library to get a card. And I can still remember the 2 books that I took out. This was like a passion for me. And so you were only allowed to have the books for 21 days. So on the 21st day, I was back at the library to get more books. Obviously, this is before the internet. So I would be doing all my homework and then I would go and read a book. But, a lot of kids did not like me, but the teachers liked me because I was like, what they wanted. Everything was done on time. I would ask penetrating questions, interesting questions that the teachers liked to answer. So that was who I was when I was growing up. And so I went from there into a career as a human development engineer, and I brought all this education with me. So that's where I was able to help a lot of people.
Now, you say the teachers liked you, but the kids didn't.
That's right.
How was that?
Well, first of all, Mark Twain had a famous saying. He said, "There's nothing more annoying than a good example." So I was annoying to the other kids. See, not only was I an A student, I was an altar boy for 4 years. I was a serious athlete, from when I was 10, I was playing organized sports. I was also a pretty good musician. So, and I would go to dances and meet pretty girls. And so there were a lot of reasons for people not to like me, you know? So that's human nature. So I just accepted that. And I mean, I had friends. When I went to prep school, it was an elite prep school. You had to take a special test to get in to the school. So that was the first time in my life that I was surrounded by people like myself, because all those other kids had to take that same test to get in that school. So I was able to find kids like me, like to read, like to learn, like serious subjects. What I did find also is that I was a polymath, meaning I was good at every subject, and I learned well on every subject. So what I learned early on is I'd have different groups of friends. Like I had one group of friends with whom I would attend science and math lectures. And had another group of friends with whom I would attend plays and poetry readings. And then I had another group of friends with whom I would play sports. And another group of friends with whom I would play music. And these groups of people hated one another. You know, like I was in the math club. I was the only guy on the football team in the math club. So I had all these skinny guys with glasses. I didn't wear glasses back then. Skinny guys with glasses. And here comes this muscle-bound guy so they all looked at me like, this must be a mistake. How did this guy get in here? I didn't care that they were not athletic. I was there to do math. I loved math. And that teacher, the guy who was the moderator of that club, he loved me. He took me under his wing. He gave me a copy of Newton's Principia to read. Which is like he could see who I was, that I would eat that up. So I just learned how to keep these groups of people separate.
How old were you when you went to the prep school?
13.
And how long did you go to the prep school?
Well, normal prep school, 4 years.
Like high school?
But it's a prep school because you are there to be prepared for college. That is the whole point from day one. Like everybody who graduates goes to college. It's a question of which college. So that's why it's called prep school. So you're not in there if you don't like to study and you don't like to learn, because it was very challenging and strict and difficult. And that was fine with me. I was used to following orders and doing what I was told. And I went to school and I went home and did my homework, went to bed. When I was in that prep school, it was like there were 1,000 students and they were all like me, sort of, one way or another. Now, when I was in elementary school, there were always some dopey kids. In fact, even kids who were left back. And so my friend was always the other kid and the other boy, because back then boys and girls did not associate. The other boy in the class who was also very smart, that was my friend. And these other kids who kind of, the kind of kids who would have fist fights, dopey kids, and use foul language, I didn't associate with them. I would go with my intelligent friends. Our idea was we'd go to the library and get up books. Oh, what did you get? Oh, I got this. Oh, we'll read that next week. So it was a select group.
So, can you give us like an example in terms of, as you were talking, like these layers, like motivation layer 2? Oh, it doesn't have to be that one if you don't know that one off the top of your head, but like one of them, because you said we'd be able to put it for somebody, like any random example.
So let me put this into a little anecdote so you get the whole context. Let's say you have a couple that's been dating for 2 years. They're talking about getting married. Now, wouldn't it make sense to ask, why does this person want to marry me? I mean, isn't that a reasonable question to ask? I'm not saying to ask the partner, but it would be a good thing to know, wouldn't it? So the guy, he knows this woman. He looks at the scale of motivation, right? As we're talking about motivation. Why? Why? And so he looks at it's got 7 levels. Now, maybe he concludes after he studies this that she wants to marry him because she loves him. That's level 1 on the scale of motivation, the highest motivation of all. So he says, I see why she wants to marry me. She loves me. Let's set the date. Now, maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe after he goes through this, he says, now that I think about this, I can see now the reason she wants to marry me is because I drive a Maserati, I have a 60-foot yacht, I fly my own Learjet, I live in a $15 million condo, and I have $10 million in the bank. That's a different motivation. That's level 4, money motivation. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it's level 4. So now, after he has that realization, what he does with it is up to him. That's not for me to say. He might say, okay, she wants to marry me for my money, but she's really a great person and she's beautiful and she's the best woman I have found. I'm going to marry her anyway. That could happen, but that might not happen. He might also say, this woman is a gold digger. I don't want to marry a gold digger. I want to marry somebody who loves me for myself and breaks up with her. Now, you might think in that latter case that he'd be upset about this, and you would be wrong. He would not. Because remember, every time you find a level, it's a positive experience. It's an insight. Ah, now I see why Betty did X, Y, and Z. See? So he's not going to be upset about it. He would be relieved. He would say, thank you, Amanda, for showing me this because I dodged a bullet. Now, did you ever notice how many elderly, unattractive men have beautiful young wives? Right? There's lots of them. Sometimes I look at a couple and I see, how could this be? This is a dumpy looking guy. He looks like he never lifted weights in his life. His hair is gray. He's overweight. And he's married to this Miss Texas, How does that work? I'll tell you how it works. Miss Texas gets a diamond necklace, a diamond ring, a mink coat, a Corvette, and a credit card. So she has everything she wants. the elderly, unattractive guy gets Miss Texas for a wife. So, see, it works for them. See? She comes to me, she says, honey, I want to go to Vegas for the weekend. He says, okay, here's $5,000, have a good time. He doesn't care. And when she comes back on Monday, he gets rewarded because he was generous. So, see, for them, it works. So there's no judgment in any of this. It's just seeing what's there. Now, let me tell you what I mean by seeing what's there. Let's say you were to invite me to your home to see your garden. I don't even know if you have a garden, but if you do, you might say, Jim, come and look at my garden. Okay. So I go into Amanda's garden and I see hydrangeas, tulips, roses, chrysanthemums, irises, peonies, forget-me-nots, etc., etc. Now, the reason I can analyze it like that is I know a lot about flowers. I've been involved in gardening since I was a little boy. So I can analyze it that way. And if you want, I could assist you. I could say, you know, these need a little fertilizer, these don't. These need to be in the shade, these need to be in the sun, et cetera, because you know about flowers. Now, if you invite some 5-year-old kid, for example, into that garden, he's going to see and smell exactly the same thing that I see and smell. But all he can say is, these are pretty and they smell nice. That's all he knows. He doesn't know the word hydrangea or iris. Now, most people, and I mean adults, are like that little kid about people. They don't know what they're looking at. And that's why more than 50% of the adults in the United States are not married. And of the ones who are married, more than 50% of them get divorced. So obviously, in all those cases, they did not understand what they were getting themselves into, or they could not penetrate the personality enough to see this is the girl for me, or whatever. See? And this book solves that because it gives you 35 axes across which to evaluate a person. This is really useful. So let's say, look, most people have kids, and most kids have trouble in school, right? So dad sees that Junior is having trouble in school. Well, this book has a scale of scholarship, which tells you how to become a better scholar. So he says, Junior, come over here, look at this. And he opens it up and puts it in front of the kid's face. So Junior looks at this and he says, you mean there's a scale of scholarship? The dad says, yes. Where are you on the scale? Now, I guarantee you, Junior is going to want to know that because he's having trouble in school. So he looks at it, and in a matter of seconds, 20, 25, 30 seconds, he will find a bracket. He'll say something like, well, I can see right away, I definitely am not at 1, 2, or 3, because that's the top of the scale, and I have a lot of trouble with this. So you see, he just got it down to 4. So the dad says, go ahead and read it, and then you can get it exactly. So he reads it. The dad can help him as a tutor. And he comes back and says, well, now that I looked at this, I can see I'm at level 5. That's not so great. That's near the bottom. No wonder I'm having a lot of trouble. That explains why I have some very specific realization, because he found the right level. And then dad says, we can move you up to the next level, and then you will be a better scholar. He says, you can? Dad says, yeah, it tells you in the book how to do that. So dad and the kid work together using this chapter. And they follow the instructions that I give. And the next report card, instead of him getting C's and D's, he's getting B's and C's. And all this was done without spending any more money, without hiring a tutor, without sending him to remedial classes, without invalidating the kid, etc. This is a very positive experience. The kid just gets better at it. So this is like a perfect example of how to use this in a practical way to help somebody.
Now, question. Could someone be on two different levels?
You mean on the same scale at the same time?
Yeah.
No. Let me explain something. There are general scales and specific scales. The specific scales have to have a context. So before we talked about motivation, right? What is my motivation toward my boss? That's one context. What is my motivation toward my father? That's a different context. See? So you might have one answer for your boss and a different answer for your dad, but it's a different context. So it's not really the same scale. You're using it on something different. But at any given point in time, you can only be at one level.
So, for example, the woman couldn't marry the guy for love and for money? It couldn't be both?
Well, that's that could be part of it, but there is going to be an overriding factor. In other words, generally, this is not black and white, it's shades of gray. So here's the thing, if he looks at it and says, yeah, she loves me, that's the top of the scale. That's going to resonate with him. You see, that's a very positive experience. The fact that she also wants to marry him because he has money is kind of beside the point. I mean, it's true. You could say to anybody, give me the reasons why you married this person, and they'll have a whole list of them. But there's one basic motivation. And you can see this in a person. Like, for example, Thomas Jefferson was at level 3 on the scale of basic purposes. His basic purpose was to win, what I call a winner. Okay? And if you study him, which I did, it's clear he won and he won and he won. Now, Alexander Hamilton was at level 2 on that scale, leader. And if you study him, you can see, wow, he was a colonel at 22. He was Washington's right-hand man. And the goal of a leader is to conquer. He wanted to conquer the British, and he helped Washington do that. Now, Jefferson never fought the British. He didn't go in the military. Hamilton left what today we call Columbia University to join the militia to fight the British because he wanted to conquer. See, different type of guy. So now that scale is what is a persistent trait. In other words, I'm sure that he was a leader. Hamilton was a leader his whole life. I don't think it changed. Most people live their whole life at one level of that scale because it's not easy to change. Some of the scales you change by the minute. You can just watch the person change. So it depends on the scale. You know, you can't infer anything about scale A by studying scale B because every scale is unique. But there is a factor of on any given scale, in any given context, you're at one level. And it's usually pretty easy to find. You see, if she loves him, the fact that he has money, that's just gravy, see? That's like the cherry on the cake. That's not the cake. See? So she's not going to be focusing on that. She's focusing on the fact that she loves this guy. Because, you know, when that happens to you, you feel something about it. It's a strong motivation. As opposed to, you know, well, he's okay, but he's got a lot of money. And I'm sure there are many people who conceal how much money they have, especially in dating, because they want to find somebody who likes them for themselves and not come after them for their money. You know, there's a certain type of woman who meet a guy and say, what kind of a car do you have? And if he says a Corvette, she says, let's take a ride in it. If he says a Volkswagen, she says, see you later. That's somebody who's money motivated. Or that could even be status motivated, which is level 3. She wants the status. Oh, yeah, my husband is the president of a corporation. See, that's status. It's level 3. It's not quite money. So there are these 7 levels, and that's true for all the scales.
And now you said some scales can change by the minute and some are hard to change. Can you give us example of like one that can change easy or like by
Sure.
the minute?
The scale of evaluation. Everybody enters that scale at level 4, which is neutral. In other words, you're neutral about this thing. And then you either go up or down. You either go from 4 up to 3 if you like it, or down to level 5 if you don't like it. So let's say friend Joe, and you say, Joe, I have 2 tickets to a polo match. Would you like to go? He says, I don't know anything about polo. I've never been to a polo match. You say, that's all right. It's fun. You get to see it. He says, okay. So he goes, right? Because he's your friend. So you get to the polo match, right? So he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know the rules. He doesn't know anybody's name. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't even know what a string of polo polies is. So he goes in there and he's watching, So after 15 minutes, you say to him, how do you like this, right? Now, he might say, yeah, I could see why a lot of people would like this. This is exciting. This looks like these guys are having a lot of fun. I'd like to try this myself. See, he went up from level 4 to level 3. But that might not happen. He might say to you, you say, how do you like this? He might say, why would anybody want to watch this? This is boring. Let's go to a movie. See, he went down to level 5. Now, he might continue to go down or go up. You see? So if you ask a person about, let's say, you have a guy who's, a lot of people used to be what they call deadheads, big fans of the Grateful Dead. Most of those people are deceased by now, but it was a big thing for many years, deadheads, and they would go to, they loved the Grateful Dead. So that was like, they were high on the scale of evaluation. A lot of other people did not like the Grateful Dead. I saw the Grateful Dead twice. The first time, I fell asleep, literally.
You.
On the second time, I left. Like, why would anybody want to watch this? Well, I could see why people want to see Cream or Hendrix or Zeppelin, but Grateful Dead, what's the thing here? So like, I went down the scale of evaluation when I saw them. So that happens all the time. A guy turns on a certain TV show, he watches it for 10 minutes, he says, I don't want to watch this. He went down a level. See, when he turned it on, he was neutral. He didn't know anything about it. He didn't even know the name of the show, right? Just comes on. He says, this is stupid. He turns it off. He went down a level. So that could happen in minutes. I find now, like, I like to watch old movies online. So, like, I'll find some movie. Very often, they don't tell you the name of the movie, what year it was. So I put it on, And after 3 minutes, I say, I'm not watching this movie. It's a dopey movie. I turn it off. So I went down on the scale of evaluation. Other times I put on a movie, and after 3 minutes, I say, oh, this is a cool movie. Humphrey Bogart, Sidney Greenstreet, all these great actors. See, I went up a level for that movie. So that's what I call a volatile scale. Some scales, that is an extremely volatile scale. And then you have other scales like the scale of basic purposes. Most people never change on that scale. They spend their whole lives at one level.
Basic purposes? What is that scale?
Well, everybody has one of 7 basic purposes. And it really defines your life. When you find your level on that scale, it is a life-changing moment. Because what happens is you find your basic purpose. And it explains your whole life. Oh, that explains why I did this and I didn't do that. Because my basic purpose is this thing. See, even though you weren't aware of it. Now you're. So what you do is you throw out the other 6 levels. You say, that's not for me. You see, like Jefferson hated Hamilton. Anybody who studied American history knows that. They were at different levels. There were 2 different levels. So Jefferson could not appreciate Hamilton's motivation, the fact that Hamilton was willing to risk his life as a young man. Eventually, Hamilton was murdered by a political opponent. That's what happens to leaders. Martin Luther King was a leader. Leaders get killed or something else like that. Whereas Jefferson, he lived to be an old man. He wasn't like that. It's a different type of person.
So, would you say Septemics applies to everyone?
Absolutely. Every person on earth is at some level on every scale.
There's like no
That's,
circumstance where someone doesn't fit like on a scale?
there are a couple of scales where a person at some point in time might not be on that scale, but at another time he is going to be on that scale. So, for example, the scale of aberration, level 1, which is where everybody enters, is irritated. Okay. If you're not irritated at all, you're not upset, you're not worried or anything like that, you're not on that scale. But as soon as something bothers you, you're on that scale. You see? So, like, you come home, right? You're fine, normal day. And you see your dog has chewed up your slippers. That irritates you. You are now on the scale of aberration. See? And then you might go down, which is not what you want to do, because that's a scale that tells you how you go from being a rational person to a crazy person. Go down that scale. It's impossible to find somebody who's not on all of the scales at some point. You might find an occasional person who's not on a certain scale at a certain moment in time. Like I've done a lot of meditation. And sometimes after meditation, I'm like floating in heaven. You know, everything looks beautiful. Nothing bothers me. You know, it's a temporary state. After a while, you come back to earth. You don't go back to the state you were in before the meditation, but you come back down a little bit. So you might say at those moments, I was maybe not on some of those scales, but as soon as reality sets in, you're on there. So, for example, recently, I had some vendor. I went on their site, paid the money. Minutes later, I said, I don't want to do this. I found I couldn't cancel it. They refused to give me back my money. I got nothing. No service, no product. Okay? That irritated me. Okay? So then I would have to go into meditation and deal with it. And after I deal with it in meditation, I'm not irritated about it. So I've kind of gotten off that scale. But most of the scales are not like that. Most of the scales, you're on it. And if you actually study the scales, you'll see that. If you actually read them, you say, oh, yeah, the scale of thought. My thought has to be one of these 7 levels of thought. And you will find it and it'll be there. So it can change your level of thought. It could go up, it could go down, but you're still on the scale.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like it can really help you with yourself or with other people.
That's right. It does. Believe me, I've been watching this for 29 years. It's not hard to get. It's very easy to use. And I'll tell you why it's easy to use. I designed these scales to wrap around the reader. In creating the scales from the data that I had, I very carefully worded it and explained it in such a way that people would get it. And if you actually look in the book, you'll see it's very clear. So people who have read the book, they say, yeah, this is not hard to get. I was able to use it right away. So, you could get this book and just use it to go through your whole life and straighten out your whole life. There's 35 scales. And if people aren't involved, it's relevant. Now, it's not going to help you to fix your car if you blew a gasket. That's a mechanical issue. That's not about people, right? This is about people. But everybody has to deal with people. We all deal with people. Even if you live alone, as soon as you go outside your front door, you have to deal with your neighbor. You have to deal with the guy at the store. You have to deal with your boss. You have to deal with people. Everywhere you go, you're dealing with people. So most people have trouble with that. They can't get along with people. So, that's how guys get into fistfights in bars, right? Guy goes into a bar, and the guy says, "Yeah, I voted for Trump." The other guy says, "You're an idiot." And they have a fist fight. Well, if you're high on the scale of equanimity, you're not going to have a fist fight. An equanimitous person doesn't descend to that. He would say, "Okay, you're entitled to your opinion. Why do you think that?" See? He's not going to get into it. And the more you know yourself, the more that's true. You know what you're about. So when situations come up, you know who you are, you know how you're going to deal with it. So it makes your life very stable and smooth, and everything runs the way you want it to run. And as things come up, you just use it to facilitate your life.
I'm sure this is something that has helped a lot of people. I am definitely going to read it. I am definitely going to dive into it. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Where can listeners connect with you?
Well, I invite your listeners to go to my website, which is septemics.com. You can see what many readers have said about it, what many journalists have written about it. You can read sections of the book itself. And there's even a pre recorded 15-minute introduction to Septemics that explains it to a new person. So it's obviously free, and you get all the data about it. And people get this, they get it. And I'll tell you, if you can read English reasonably well, and you want to improve yourself or others, this book is for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Do you have any final words of wisdom for the listeners?
Yes. Yes, I would like to say to your listeners that the data in this book are vital for every person. It can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. So, most guys, if you talk to most guys, they'll tell you they don't understand women. Well, if you use this book and analyze your girlfriend, you will understand her. So, it's very applicable and user friendly, and it applies to anybody who wants to improve himself. Now, of course, not everybody wants to improve himself. Psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists and drug addicts and professional killers and things like that. They're not the public for this book, but you certainly are.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I end my podcast with two ending segments. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
No?
He's an author, motivational speaker, former
Huh?
mom. He's got a podcast, and he ends his podcast with these two segments, and I liked them, so I incorporated them to mine. The
Okay.
first segment is the many sides to us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in one word each.
Okay.
What is one word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Smart.
What is one word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Level headed.
What is one word you'd use to describe yourself?
Conscientious.
What is one word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you as?
In one word, I never really thought about that before. It's hard for me to say it in one word. Maybe stuck up might be something that some people might think.
What is one word you're trying to embody right now?
At this very instant, or
Yeah.
just in general in my life.
In general,
Okay.
presently.
I'm trying to embody angelicness.
Second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in up to a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
Mind your own business.
Why is that the best advice?
Because people get into trouble when they don't mind their own business. You know that guy Daniel Penny who was on the subway? And there was a crazy guy there threatening to kill everybody, and he subdued him? They charged him. He had to go through a trial. Now, he was acquitted, but still, if he had minded his own business, he wouldn't have had all that trouble. You know, Alexis de Tocqueville, 19th century philosopher, said something to the effect that the main reason that people get in trouble is they're not willing to just stay in their homes. And that's kind of the same thing.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
The worst advice, oh boy. That's an ugly thought. Probably my mother encouraged me to go with to be with a certain woman, you know, and it turned out to be a train wreck. So that was like the worst advice I ever got.
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
I guess I would say sugary foods. You know, I don't eat sugar at all, and that was something I used to do before I learned not to do it.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be, if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
That I helped the people of Earth to lead better lives through my book.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
Because could this be something somebody else thought of, or do I have to come up with a new one?
It's supposed to be a new one, not a law that already exists.
Do not penalize people for being productive.
And why would that be the law?
So that productive people are not stopped from being productive.
How are they penalized now for being productive?
Well, it's wall to wall. It's everywhere you go. Like, for example, if you're really good at something, you get well paid for it, your taxes go up. You're being penalized. You know, my son complains to me. He's a brilliant designer, and he makes a lot of money, and they take a lot of it away from him. I have a lot of people say, why am I killing myself like this? They're only going to take it away anyway. I mean, you know, anybody who's really good is going to wind up paying 50% in taxes. So that's penalizing people for being productive. I mean, the federal government has been going after Elon Musk for some time now. He's like the most productive guy I can think of. And, you know, he tells all kinds of stories about absolutely idiotic things that he has to put up with from the government. Stupid rules that don't even make any sense. And that's really a good example of a productive person who is continually hampered by people punishing him for being productive.
I get what you mean. Well, thank you again for speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Amanda. It was great to meet you.
You as well. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Manders Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.